At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. When an independent council declared that the final day of the galactic inter-university competition would be held on an ice planet, Professor Isev could hardly contain his delight. For him and his students, Frizzar, born and bred on a frozen world, it promised an overwhelming advantage over every other species. In his mind, the humans, who had somehow managed to defeat his team in the forest biome, were doomed this time. The survival games, adored across the galaxy, would at last crown a new champion, bringing lucrative sponsors to his team and, inevitably, a flood of credits into his own pocket. The red sun hung like a dying ember on the horizon, its crimson light bleeding across the jagged mountain peaks that formed the eastern boundary of the competition zone. Professor Isev stood at the viewport for a long moment, his reflection ghost-like against the alien landscape, before turning away in a sudden movement. His purple eyes, deep as frozen berries, scanned the faces of his 10 students. A smile materialized on his angular face, thin and sharp as an icicle, as he absorbed their appearance. Their skin possessed the pristine whiteness of fresh snowfall, unmarred and perfect. Their hair, a gentle blue like the shadows in glacial ice, seemed perfect to blend with the snow outside. These students, these living bags of money, represented his chance at wealth and the academic status that had eluded him for far too long.
"Listen carefully,"
Isev began. The students straightened instinctively, their bodies responding to years of conditioning under his strict tutelage.
"We cannot, will not, lose today. Do you understand me?"
The students nodded in unison, their postures rigid, hands clasped behind their backs.
"You were born for this,"
he continued, beginning to pace among them. His robes, deep purple to match his eyes, swirled around him like liquid shadow.
"Your bodies operate at temperatures that would send other species into hypothermic shock within minutes. Your very blood runs cooler than room temperature water in most planets. 12 degrees cooler than a human's, 15 degrees cooler than a Triarian's."
He gestured toward the viewport, performing a theatrical sweep of his arm.
"Look at yourselves. Truly look. Your skin makes you invisible against the snow. Perfect camouflage that took millions of years to develop. When you stand still out there, you become part of the landscape itself."
He stopped in front of a tall male student and reached up to tap the young Frizzar's pointed ear with one long pale finger.
"These ears, they can filter the wind and hear through a snowstorm."
Moving to another student, a female with particularly pronounced white eyelashes, he gestured at her face.
"Your white eyelashes and eyebrows, they make you one with the snow. No weak spots in your camouflage."
His voice rose with each word, filling the space with his fervor.
"Evolution built you for this exact moment. Your ancestors survived the great freeze of our planet when our sun dimmed for 300 years.
He was shouting now, his face flushed with passion despite his cool body temperature.
"To lose here would be shameful. Shameful to your parents who invested their life savings in your education. To the children you will one day have who will carry our genetic legacy. And especially to those distant ancestors who survived with nothing but animal skins and raw determination. Today, you will not merely win. You will crush those humans and do whatever is needed to ensure our victory."
A hand raised tentatively near the back of the group.
"Professor Isev?"
The professor's head snapped toward the voice like a targeting system locking onto its prey.
"Yes, Ailey?"
Ailey stood slightly apart from the others, her posture less rigid, her blue hair hanging loose rather than pulled back in the traditional competitive braids.
"I thought, isn't the galactic inter-university competition about friendship among species? The promotional materials say competition is secondary to celebrating various cultures and planetary climates. The founding charter specifically states that the real goal is
The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Isiv slowly walked towards her. The other students unconsciously shifted away from Ailey's position, creating a circle of isolation around her.
Friendship.
He drew out the word like it was something putrid, something that offended his very being.
Cultural celebration?
He stopped directly in front of her, and though Ailey stood a full head taller, she was tall even for Frizzar. She seemed to shrink under his gaze, her shoulders hunching inward.
Tell me, Ailey, do you think the sponsors who pour millions of credits into this event care about friendship?
Before she could formulate a response, his hand shot out with shocking speed, snatching the datapad from her grasp. The device, still warm from her touch, looked small and fragile in his grip.
You won't be needing entertainment during our full day of survival in the snow. Perhaps if you focused less on naive idealism and more on winning, you wouldn't need such distractions to fill the empty spaces in your mind.
He turned to address the rest of the class, holding Ailey's datapad high like a trophy of war.
Does anyone else believe that competition is secondary?
The other students took subtle but decisive steps away from Ailey, their eyes fixed on the floor as if afraid to look anywhere else. Some clutched their own datapads closer to their bodies, protective gestures that revealed their understanding of the implicit threat. Professor Isiv controlled more than just their entertainment devices. Their grades, their recommendations for graduate programs, their entire academic futures rested in his cold, pale hands.
I thought not,
He said, tucking Ailey's datapad into his robes.
Superiority comes from victory. Remember that when you're out there today.
Minutes crawled by in uncomfortable silence inside their ship. The red sun climbed incrementally higher, and finally it broke completely free from the horizon, a perfect sphere of red fire against the pale violet sky. This officially marked the beginning of the final day of the event that Isiv hoped would etch his name into the history of their species. Professor Isiv, the coach who brought glory back to Frizzar, the strategist who proved their evolutionary superiority. The goal was deceptively simple: survive a full day-night cycle in this environment, 26 standard hours on this planet, with temperatures ranging from -30 in the day to -60 at night. Each team would be scored on various factors: resource acquisition, shelter construction, team cooperation, and, of course, the percentage of members who completed the entire challenge. Isiv had run the calculations 1,000 times. With their natural advantages, his team should score perfectly.
Move out, he commanded. Maintain visual contact at all times. No deviations from the plan we've rehearsed.
His students filed toward the exit in perfect formation, their footsteps synchronized from hours of practice drills. Ailey trailed behind the group, conspicuously empty-handed, while the others clutched their datapads like lifelines, the devices containing entertainment, reference materials, and communication capabilities she now lacked. As soon as the lost student disappeared through the airlock, the heavy door sealing behind them, Isiv made his way to his private cabin. He settled into a chair that had cost more than most Frizzar made in a year, and with a languid gesture, the wall screen activated, its massive surface displaying the official channel of the inter-university competition. A Vertrar appeared on screen, a reptilian being whose species had evolved on a world of swamps and humidity. According to the text overlay beneath him, his name was Zitori, and he'd been the event's primary announcer for a few years. His forked tongue flicked out every few seconds, tasting the air in an instinctive behavior his species couldn't suppress, betraying his discomfort even within the climate-controlled studio.
Welcomes, beings of all systems, to the final day of the 347th Galactic Inter-University Competition.
Zitori's enthusiasm seemed forced, his words carefully rehearsed. The early hour, combined with his cold-blooded nature's natural lethargy at low temperatures, made his normally dynamic presentation feel sluggish.
As our red sun rises over the frozen plains of Hibernia too, our brave students prepare to face their greatest challenge yet, the ice planet, where only the strongest, better trained, and most resourceful will survive.
Isiv leaned forward, his fingers steepled in anticipation as Zatori began introducing the teams.
First, we have the clear favorites for this Arctic challenge, the Frizzar team from the University of Eternal Winter.
The screen switched to drone footage, the autonomous cameras sweeping low over Isov's students as they emerged from their ship. Even from the aerial view, Isov could see Ailey at the back, maintaining the regulation 3 meters distance from the lost row, her empty hands a clear contrast to the others who held their data pads at the regulation carry position.
These remarkable beings evolved on a world where water has never existed in liquid form on the surface. Professor Isiv's team has dominated the previous ice challenges, winning gold in the Tundra Trials, the Glacier Games, and the infamous Frozen Forest Orienteering competition. Today, on a world that mirrors their home.
But Zatori had already switched feeds, his commentary shifting, and what Isov saw next made him sit up straighter, his purple eyes widening in confusion and growing irritation.
And here come the humans from Earth's space universities.
The screen showed absolute chaos. Where the Frizzar had emerged orderly, the humans burst from their ship like a dam had broken. They poured out in a laughing, shouting mass of thermal suits in various colors, red, blue, yellow, green, as if they'd deliberately chosen to look as unprofessional as possible. One human, a male with dark skin visible through his visor's helmet, immediately threw himself backward into a pristine snowbank, his arms and legs moving in wide arcs. "Snow Angel!" he shouted to his teammates, who laughed and began documenting his antics with their recording devices. Another human, a female with bright red hair, scooped up handfuls of snow and began packing it between her gloved palms, compressing it into a dense sphere.
Snowball fight later!
But it was the third human that truly caught Isiv's attention, a tall male. He spun in circles, laughing, before shouting directly at the nearest camera drone.
"I'm gonna make a snowman! The biggest snowman in the galaxy!"
He paused, tilting his head as if listening to an internal voice.
"No! Wait! Change my mind! I'm building an igloo!"
Isiv's brow furrowed so deeply it created valleys in his pale skin. What was an igloo? The word meant nothing in any language he knew. Zatori continued his commentary, his tongue flicking more rapidly now as he warmed to his subject.
"The humans, as always, bring their characteristic enthusiasm to the competition. Despite evolving on a world where ice ages were temporary interruptions rather than permanent states, they've shown remarkable tricks in previous challenges. Now let's look at our other competitors."
The screen split into multiple feeds showing the other teams.
"Most of these species,"
Zatori noted with professional detachment,
"aren't expected to last more than a few hours in these conditions. The Ziarans' metabolisms will slow to dangerous levels, the insect faction risk catastrophic exoskeleton fractures, and the Aquaticans' suits have only 12 hours of heating capacity. This challenge will truly separate the adapted from the merely determined."
But Isiv had stopped listening to the commentary. His attention was fixed on the human feed, where something unprecedented was happening. Instead of the chaos he'd expected to devolve into exhausted collapse, the humans had organized. Half were gathering snow in a growing pile. Others were using improvised tools to cut and shape blocks from the compressed snow, claiming they would build an igloo. What was an igloo? The question nagged at him like a frozen splinter in his mind as the full day circle of survival officially began, the chronometer on his screen beginning its countdown from 26 hours. At the same time in the survival field, Ailey and the other students watched in confusion as the humans hurried to help their friend build what they were calling an igloo. The human who'd announced his intention was already on his knees in the snow, using his hands and a flat piece of metal he'd produced from somewhere to shape and compact snow into rectangular blocks.
Why are they behaving so strangely?
Estov muttered beside her, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. His blue hair had already begun to accumulate tiny ice crystals where his breath had frozen on the strands.
They're wasting energy,
Another student observed.
all that unnecessary movement will burn calories they need to maintain core temperature.
Look at them throwing snow at each other! Madness!
They'll burn out in hours at this rate.
Professor Isif predicted this. Warm welders always underestimate the energy requirements of cold survival.
Ailey found herself transfixed by the humans' enthusiastic behavior. Some were now rolling massive snowballs that grew larger with each revolution, while others seemed to be planning something complex, their hands moving in animated gestures as they discussed and pointed at various spots on the ground. One had produced what looked like string and was marking out a large circle in the snow.
What should we do?
She asked, looking at her teammates, trying once more to be part of the group she'd trained with for months. Estov turned to her, his purple eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second before deliberately sliding away, as if she were something unpleasant to look at.
We should discuss strategy,
he said to the group at large, his body angling to exclude her from the circle that was forming.
Professor Isif made his position very clear. Associating with certain individuals who question his methods might negatively affect our academic standings.
The words stung more than the cold wind that had begun to whip across the frozen plain, and Ailey noticed how the others weren't being openly hostile. That would be too obvious. Instead, they simply acted as if she wasn't there, forming a discussion circle that somehow didn't have space for her, their bodies creating a wall of backs turned in her direction.
The temperature won't kill us,
one student was saying.
Our low baseline body temperature means we can endure extended exposure, but spending the night in the elements will be uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable is an understatement,
another replied.
Without shelter, we'll need to maintain movement to prevent our extremities from reaching dangerous temperatures. Even we have limits.
There's a forest line about 200 meters south. We could gather deadwood for structure and possibly fire.
And the river! The briefing mentioned it hasn't completely frozen. Might be something we can catch there. Fish, maybe. I'll help gather wood,
Ailey offered, trying to insert herself into the planning, her voice slightly too loud in her desperation to be heard. The group fell silent. Slowly, Estov turned to look at her direction. His purple eyes had taken on the hard quality of frozen berries, beautiful but utterly without warmth.
Nothing,
he said, each word dropping like an ice crystal.
You should do nothing, and if you truly want to help the team, help by keeping your distance. Your presence is disruptive to group cohesion.
The words hit her like sharp needles, each one a painful impact against her chest. She stood there in the snow, suddenly feeling colder than she'd ever felt in her life, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. She watched them walk away toward the tree line, their white forms quickly becoming indistinct against the snowy landscape, like ghosts fading into mist. Their footprints in the snow seemed to mock her, each one a reminder that she wasn't welcome to follow. Lost in her sorrow, she didn't notice the projectile until it struck her square in the face. The impact was shocking. She fell hard, landing on her back in a deep drift, snow exploding around her in a white cloud. She lay there, stunned and disoriented, the sky above a pale purple through her snow-covered lashes. The cold against her exposed skin was sharp, and she could taste the snow, pure with a faint mineral tang from the alien soil beneath.
Oh no! Oh God, I'm so sorry!
A figure appeared above her, blocking out the red sun, creating a halo effect around their helmeted head. Strong hands, surprisingly gentle despite their thick gloves, helped her sit up, then steadied her as she got to her feet.
I didn't see you there! Are you okay? Did I hurt you?
As her vision cleared, she found herself looking at a human male, his dark eyes wide with genuine concern. He was brushing snow from her face, his touch far warmer than any Frizzar's would be. Behind him, she suddenly became aware of absolute chaos. The humans were engaged in what could only be described as warfare. They ran in all directions, diving behind hastily constructed snow walls, rolling to avoid incoming projectiles, laughing with an intensity that suggested this was the most fun they'd had in months. Snowballs flew through the air in deadly arcs, some students displaying remarkable accuracy, leading their targets like trained soldiers. "We need to move!" the human said, apparently realizing they were standing in the middle of no man's land. A barrage of snow projectiles whistled past them, one clipping his shoulder and exploding in a puff of white. "Tactical withdrawal!" He grabbed her hand, the warmth of his grip shocking even through both their gloves, and pulled her behind a large boulder that jutted from the snow like a giant's tooth. They dove behind it just as several snowballs struck the spot where they'd been standing, the impacts sounding like muffled drums. "Safe!" he declared, grinning despite having just assaulted her with frozen precipitation. His smile was infectious, revealing white teeth that seemed to glow against his skin. "I'm Leo Mackenzie, by the way. From Vancouver. Well, originally. Really sorry about the face shot. We got a bit carried away. Snow does that to humans. Makes us act like we're kids again. You were standing so still, looking at the ground. I didn't even register you were there until after I'd thrown it." Ailey stared at his smiling face, something about his easy warmth and genuine remorse making her next words tumble out before she could stop them.
My group doesn't want me. Maybe I deserve to be hit in the face with compacted snow.
Leo's expression shifted from amusement to concern so quickly it was like watching ice melt in reverse, sudden and complete. "Wait, what? Your group abandoned you?"
I questioned our professor about the true purpose of the competition. He didn't like what I said. Now they won't even look at me.
"You're joking."
I'm not.
"But that's insane. You're a team. Teams don't abandon members."
Apparently they do when those members threaten their grades by association.
Leo stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to determine if this was some elaborate joke. Then his face brightened like the sun emerging from clouds. "Well, that's their loss. Come join us."
What? But the competition!
"You mean the competition that's supposed to be about friendship between species and cultural exchange?" He grinned, and she noticed how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The warmth that bloomed in her chest had nothing to do with thermal regulation. This human was using her own argument, the very words that had gotten her ostracized, as a reason to include her. Before she could second-guess herself, before the voice of Professor Issiv in her head could convince her otherwise, she found herself nodding. "Excellent! Come on!" Leo pulled her to her feet again, then cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, everyone! Snowball truce! Time out! I want you all to meet someone!" The effect was immediate and almost comical. Humans froze mid-throw, several still holding packed snow above their heads. One was halfway through a diving roll and simply stopped, lying on his side in the snow. Another had been in the process of tackling a teammate, and they both paused, tangled together like a statue of awkward combat. "This is—" Leo paused, turning to her. "Sorry, I got excited and didn't get your name."
Ailey!
"This is Ailey," Leo announced. "Her team ditched her, so she's with us now." To her amazement, the humans simply accepted this. There was no debate, no discussion of whether this was allowed, no concerns about competition rules or divided loyalties. One human, a woman with intricate braids that must have taken hours to create, immediately jogged over and handed her a handful of snow.
Perfect timing! I'm Jenny, by the way. We need all the help we can get with the igloos. Can you pack snow? Yes? Brilliant! You're on construction duty. Oh, and watch out for James.
She pointed at a red-headed human who was already packing another snowball.
He's got no mercy and perfect aim.
The morning flew by in a blur. The humans worked with surprising speed despite their playful attitude. The igloo construction was fascinating. They started by marking a circle in the snow about 3 meters in diameter, then began cutting blocks from a designated quarry area they'd established. She watched in amazement as they laid the first row, each block angled slightly inward. The trick, Leo explained as they worked, his hands steady despite the cold, is the spiral. See? We don't build in separate rows. It's one continuous spiral from bottom to top. Each block leans on the one before it and supports the one after. She helped carry countless armloads of snow, her resistance to cold helping her endure the work. Meanwhile, the humans worked in teams, one group cutting blocks, another transporting, a third doing the actual construction. No, it needs to angle more, one human was saying, adjusting a block. The coordination was unexpected. She'd assumed their chaotic energy meant they were careless, but when it came to the actual construction, they were meticulous. Each block was tested for stability before the next was placed. Gaps were filled with loose snow that quickly froze solid. By midday, 4 structures were nearly complete, and a team of humans returned from the river with fish. They'd fashioned spears from branches and spent 2 hours standing in the freezing water, perfectly still, waiting for the right moment to strike. The cold water actually makes them sluggish, one of the fishing team explained, showing off a silver fish about 30 centimeters long. Easier to catch than in warm water, if you can stand the temperature. Others had gathered dead wood from the forest edge, and soon the smell of cooking fish filled the air, the smoke rising straight up in the still afternoon air. Throughout the day, she caught glimpses of her own species watching from a distance. She could feel their stares like cold needles, heavy with judgment and perhaps a hint of jealousy. They had constructed a basic lean-to from branches and were huddled together for warmth, looking miserable. She could almost hear Professor Isiv's voice in their heads, berating them for not being tougher, for showing weakness. The afternoon was spent in constant motion. She threw herself into whatever task the humans assigned, packing snow into gaps, smoothing interior walls with bare hands to create the ice glaze Leo had explained, helping to carry supplies. The work helped her forget the shame that tried to creep in, the voice in her head that said she was betraying her species, disappointing her family, ruining her future. You're really good at this, Jenny commented, watching Ailey shape a keystone block, the final piece that would lock the dome structure in place. Have you built with snow before?
Never. We don't build snow shelters back home. The normal code doesn't bother us enough to need them, and when it's truly cold, we use technology to build climate-controlled spaces.
Really? But you are so good at it.
The phrase warmed her more than any fire could have. As evening approached, with the red sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and orange, Leo found her taking a break near one of the completed igloos. She was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced, not from cold or hunger, but from constant activity and social interaction. So, he said, settling beside her in the snow with a grateful sigh, want to know the science behind these things?
The igloos? Yes, I've been wondering all day. How does snow become shelter?
It's actually brilliant, Leo explained, his hands moving animatedly as he talked, creating shapes in the air. First, snow is about 90% trapped air, which makes it an excellent insulator. The R value, that's thermal resistance, of compressed snow is about 1 per inch. Our walls are about 8 inches thick, so we're looking at R8 insulation. He continued, clearly passionate about the subject. The dome shape is key. It's one of the strongest architectural forms because it distributes weight evenly, no stress points. The Romans figured this out with the Pantheon, and the Inuit perfected it with igloos. And here's the really cool part. Literally, body heat from the occupants warms the inside just enough to slightly melt the inner surface. When that refreezes, it creates a smooth ice shell that's even stronger than the original blocks.
We never developed anything like this,
Ailey mused, running her hand along the entrance tunnel they'd built, another feature that trapped warm air inside while keeping cold air out.
The cold doesn't affect us the same way it does you. We just endured it.
Yeah, but you're missing out. It's not just about survival. It's cozy. Come see. He led her to one of the completed structures. The entrance was low, forcing them to crawl through a short tunnel. But inside was surprisingly spacious. The dome peaked at about 2 meters, and the floor space could comfortably accommodate 4 people. Another human, a woman named Susan, who'd been one of the architects of the design, was already there, arranging sleeping bags they'd brought from their ship.
The walls block the wind completely,
She explained, running her hand along the smooth interior surface.
and with 3 or 4 people inside, body heat alone can raise the temperature by 20, even 30 degrees. The sleeping platform,
She indicated a raised section they'd built from snow.
keeps us off the coldest air, which sinks to the entrance level.
It's remarkable.
Ailey admitted, genuinely impressed. She touched the wall, feeling how the surface had already begun to glaze from their body heat.
You built 5 of these in a single day?
Well, you helped, Leo pointed out. You probably moved more snow than any 3 of us combined.
I didn't do much.
Are you kidding? You shaped at least 40 blocks. You helped smooth the walls on 3 igloos. You gathered firewood for an hour. You're part of the team now, whether you like it or not. The words "part of the team" sent another wave of warmth through her chest. It was too late to worry about grades now, anyway. Professor Isiv would never forgive her for this. Her academic career at the University of Eternal Winter was effectively over the moment she'd accepted Leo's invitation.
Okay.
She said quietly, surprised by how easy it was to accept. As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, the igloos proved their worth. The humans couldn't seem to stay in their assigned shelters, constantly moving between structures to share stories, distribute the last of the cooked fish, and engage in good-natured arguments about sleeping arrangements. "No! James snores like a spacecraft engine," someone protested. "He can't be in our igloo."
I do not snore.
"You do! We recorded it last time."
That was breathing. Normal breathing.
Finally, after much negotiation and laughter, she found herself assigned to an igloo with Leo and Jenny. The 3 of them ended up pressed close together under shared thermal blankets, their bodies creating a warm cocoon that defied the brutal cold outside. The walls of the igloo glowed faintly from the small LED light they'd hung from the ceiling, and she could hear the wind howling past, but inside it was calm and warm.
You know,
Jenny said with mock seriousness, propping herself up on one elbow.
you're not generating enough heat. We might have to throw you out.
The cold doesn't affect me too much.
She replied, having learned to recognize and participate in human humor over the course of the day.
Maybe you 2 should leave. I'd have more room.
Leo laughed, the sound bright in the small space. "She's got you there. The Ice Princess claims her castle."
Ice Princess?
Ailey asked, unfamiliar with the term. "It's from an old Earth story," Leo explained, his voice getting softer as exhaustion began to claim him. "About a princess who was born with magical powers to create ice and snow. Seemed appropriate." As she lay between them, listening to their breathing gradually slow and deepen into sleep, Ailey realized she'd forgotten about the competition entirely. The constant anxiety that had plagued her since the morning, about grades, about her future, about disappointing her family, had melted away like snow in warm hands. This felt less like a survival challenge and more like friendship across species. Real friendship, the kind the competition was supposedly about. She fell asleep warmer than she'd ever been, surrounded by the soft sounds of human breathing and the occasional creak of settling snow, and her worries melted into pleasant dreams. A full day had passed, and as the red sun prepared to rise once more, painting the eastern mountains in shades of crimson and gold, Professor Isiv paced his cabin like a caged predator. His footsteps had worn a visible path in the expensive carpet, his hands clenched behind his back so tightly his knuckles had turned from white to a concerning shade of blue. The night had been a disaster of unprecedented proportions. 3 of his students, 3, had failed to endure the cold despite their evolutionary advantages. They had done exactly as he had taught them, digging into the ground to escape the wind and using their natural ability to slow their metabolism. Yet the temperature on this planet was so low that even their cold-adapted physiologies had reached their limits. Meanwhile, every single human had survived the night. All of them. All 10 humans had emerged from their ridiculous snow structures as the monitoring drones made their morning rounds, laughing and stretching in the dawn light as if they'd spent the night in a luxury hotel rather than in sub-zero temperatures on an alien world. And that girl, that treacherous, naive, idealistic girl, had spent the night with them, warm and comfortable, while her own species suffered, while her own teammates had been forced to abandon the challenge in humiliation. The moment the sun crested the horizon, officially ending the challenge with its first complete raise, Isiv stormed from the ship. His fury was a living thing, radiating from him in waves that seemed to lower the temperature around him even further. He would destroy Ailey's academic career. He would ensure she never found placement in any university in Frizzar space. He would contact her parents and explain exactly how their daughter had betrayed her species for the company of primitive warm-worlders who— "Professor Isiv," a melodious voice called out, cutting through his internal tirade. "Perfect timing. We're about to begin." Isiv turned to see President Aquinas approaching, his blue skin glistening within his water-filled environmental suit. The suit impressive, maintaining a perfect aquatic environment while allowing him to walk on land. Camera drones buzzed around him like mechanical insects, their lenses moving constantly. Behind him, teams were gathering on the designated assembly field for the closing ceremony. Isiv forced his features into something resembling calm, though his purple eyes still burned inside. He couldn't afford to lose control on a galaxy-wide broadcast. The sponsors would be watching. His colleagues would be watching. Everyone would be watching. To his surprise, even species that had retreated within the first hour were present. The reptilians stood in a cluster, their heating suits glowing like embers. The insectoids huddled together, several sporting visible cracks in their exoskeletons. Everyone had returned for the final ceremony, tradition demanding that all participants be present for the final scoring.
Before we begin,
President Aquinas announced, his voice amplified across the assembled crowd by floating speaker drones,
I'd like to call forward 2 special students, Leo and Ailey.
Isiv's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. This was irregular. Highly irregular. Previous competitions had never singled out individual students. The scoring was done by team, always by team. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket where he'd placed Ailey's confiscated datapad, his fingers tightening around it until the device creaked. The president positioned himself between the 2 students, his aquatic features somehow managing to convey satisfaction despite the vast evolutionary gulf between his species and those displaying emotion through facial expressions. The camera drones circled closer, their mechanical whirring creating a constant background hum.
My fellow beings from across the galaxy,
the president began,
what we witnessed yesterday was something truly special. The friendship that developed between these 2 students, representing species from opposite ends of the temperature spectrum, embodies everything this competition was meant to celebrate.
Isiv's stomach began to sink, a cold that had nothing to do with the planet's temperature spreading through his body.
However,
the president continued, his tone becoming more serious, the bubbles in his suit rising faster as his emotional state intensified.
in reviewing the footage, as we do for all final challenges, we discovered something deeply concerning about the Frizzar team's approach to this competition.
Multiple sets of eyes turned toward Isiv. Compound eyes, reptilian eyes, mammalian eyes, all focused on him with varying degrees of judgment.
We found that Ailey was deliberately abandoned by her team after questioning the competitive philosophy of their professor. She was isolated and excluded, forced to seek shelter with another species to survive. This is not merely against the rules, it is against the very spirit of what we're trying to achieve here.
That's not...
Isiv tried to defend himself.
The girl chose to
Furthermore,
The president cut him off, a rare breach of protocol that showed how seriously he took this matter.
upon investigation, including interviews with other Frizzar students conducted this morning, we discovered that Professor Isiv has been promoting a win-at-all-costs mentality that goes entirely against the founding principles of this event, threatening grades, confiscating personal items as punishment for expressing opinions. These actions warrant serious consequences.
Voices rose from the crowd, other professors expressing their disgust, students from various species murmuring about similar experiences with other coaches, someone calling for the Frizzar team to be expelled entirely from the competition. Isiv noticed his own students staring at the ground in shame, their white faces flushed with blue undertones of embarrassment. Even Ailey looked close to tears, though whether from shame or vindication he couldn't tell. President Aquinas raised a flippered hand for silence.
However, punishing an entire team for one professor's actions would be wrong and would perpetuate the very injustice we are trying to address. These students showed remarkable resilience and skill. They are not responsible for the toxic environment they were placed in.
The president's suit bubbled with what Isiv recognized as the Aquatican equivalent of a smile.
Therefore, I am pleased to announce that Ailey has earned special recognition. For interspecies cooperation, 50 points. For learning from another culture and successfully applying that knowledge, 10 points. And for surviving the entire challenge despite being abandoned by her team, despite having her equipment confiscated, despite every obstacle placed in her path, 100 points.
Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Those were massive point values, more than most teams earned in an entire event.
This brings the Frizzar team into a tie with the humans for this event,
the president continued, his voice carrying a trace of satisfaction.
However, with their previous victories in the forest and mountain biomes, the humans win the overall competition.
The humans erupted in celebration, immediately pulling Ailey into their group hug, lifting her off her feet despite her height advantage. She was crying now, but they were clearly tears of joy, her face transformed by a happiness Isiv had never seen in any of his students in 5 years of teaching. Isiv stood frozen, his mind calculating the ramifications. This would be broadcast across the galaxy, his methods, his philosophy, his treatment of students, all exposed for billions to see. His career at the University of Eternal Winter was over. And the worst was that he couldn't even blame Ailey. She'd earned more points alone than his other students combined. Her naive belief in friendship, the very thing he'd punished her for, had somehow won the day. As he watched her celebrating with the humans, her face bright with a pure joy that seemed to light her from within, so different from the cold composure he'd taught his students to aim for, Isiv felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Doubt. Not redemption. He was too set in his ways, too convinced of his own superiority, too invested in his worldview for that. But for the first time, he wondered if perhaps his methods had been a mistake. And somewhere in the crowd, a human was teaching a Frizzar how to make a proper snowball, while their laughter echoed across the ice, a sound that would haunt Professor Isiv's dreams for years to come, the sound of joy he'd never thought to teach.